So, you've probably heard all the hype. There's a new generation of artificial intelligence that can finally think. You know, it can reason, it can self-correct, it shows its work, just like we do. But are we really looking at genuine intelligence here, or is it just a very, very sophisticated magic trick? Let's dig in.
Well, that's exactly the question a team of researchers at Apple wanted to answer. They set out to cut through all the noise and figure out if these new thinking models have actually learned how to solve problems, or if they've just gotten incredibly good at faking it.
All right, so what is this new breed of AI that supposedly thinks?
They're called large reasoning models, or LRMs for short. And honestly, the easiest way to get your head around them is to picture a student in a math class. A standard AI, it's like the kid who just jots down the final answer. But an LRM, well, that's like the student who shows all their work, laying out every single step of their thinking for you to see.
And here's what that looks like in practice. On the left, with standard AI, it's a total black box. The answer just appears. But on the right, with the LRM, you see this whole extra phase. It's that thinking part, where it's breaking things down, checking its work, and weighing options. And that is supposed to be the massive leap forward.
Okay, but this brings up a huge problem, right? How do you know if that thinking is the real deal, and not just a more convincing performance? How in the world do you actually test for genuine reasoning?
It turns out the usual ways we test these things, like with math or coding problems, are kind of broken. For one, these models have basically ingested the entire internet, so there's a good chance they've just memorized the answers. That's what we call data contamination. Plus, just because an AI gets the right answer doesn't tell you anything about whether its process was logical.
So the researchers had to get clever. They needed a totally new kind of test. Something that was pure logic, something where they could crank up the difficulty step by step, and, most importantly, something they knew for a fact the AI hadn't seen before.
And their solution? It was pretty brilliant, actually. Classic logic puzzles. Things like the Tower of Hanoi. The rules are simple, but to actually solve them requires real planning, real strategy. And crucially, they're not the kind of stuff floating around on the internet for the AI to just memorize.
And when they ran the tests, well, the results were not what anyone expected. It turns out that sometimes making an AI think can actually make it worse at solving a problem.
The researchers found 3 totally distinct zones of performance. On the really simple problems, the standard non-thinking AI was actually more accurate. Weird, right? The thinking AI only pulled ahead when the problems were in that medium difficulty sweet spot. But as soon as the puzzles got really hard, both of them just hit a brick wall.
And you can see it perfectly right here in the data. Look at that green zone on the left for low complexity. The dotted line, the standard AI, is on top. It's winning. It's only in that blue middle section that the solid line, our thinking model, takes the lead. But then the moment they hit the red zone, high complexity, boom, their accuracy for both just plummets off a cliff.
So let's talk about this collapse, because this is where things get really fascinating. What is actually going on inside the AI's mind when it hits that wall? And just to be clear, this wasn't some fluke with a single model. The team tested 5 different state-of-the-art AIs, and every single one of them showed the exact same pattern. As the puzzles get harder, their accuracy eventually just hits 0, flatline.
But the truly bizarre finding was why they fail. I mean, you'd assume a harder problem would make the AI think harder, right? But this chart shows the absolute opposite. Their reasoning effort goes up as it gets harder, but only to a point. Then, and this is the wild part, as the problem gets even harder, they actually start to think less.
So this isn't just about getting the answer wrong anymore. This points to a really fundamental limitation. When these models are faced with a truly difficult problem, they don't just fail, it's like they just give up. They literally stop trying to reason, even though they've got plenty of processing power left in the tank. Okay, so when you start putting all these pieces together, a pretty clear picture starts to emerge about what's really going on under the hood.
One of the biggest red flags is just how brittle their performance is. For example, a model could nail the Tower of Hanoi puzzle, making over 100 correct moves in a row. But then you give that same model the river crossing puzzle, which is way simpler, and it fails after just 4 moves. That's not what general intelligence looks like.
And if you're still not convinced, check this out. This is the final nail in the coffin. The researchers literally gave the AI the answer key, the exact step-by-step instructions on how to solve the puzzle. It didn't have to reason at all, just follow directions. And it still couldn't do it. Performance didn't get any better. So let's just recap the verdict. AI reasoning seems to completely collapse once a problem hits a certain difficulty.
And when things get tough, the models don't think harder, they actually think less. Their skills are all over the place, totally inconsistent. And maybe worst of all, they can't even reliably follow directions when you spell them out.
Which brings us right back to where we started. That thinking process we see the AI generate, it looks an awful lot like reasoning. But what these tests show is that the moment you put it under any real pressure, the whole illusion just shatters. And that leaves us with a huge question. Are we actually building true artificial reasoners, or are we just getting dangerously good at building mimics?